Before the world had answers, it had stories. Long before science could explain the trembling of the earth or the fury of a storm, human beings looked up at the sky and felt something they could not name. A kind of longing, a kind of fear. And in that silence between understanding and mystery, they did what humans have always done. They created meaning. Greek mythology was not invented to entertain. It was invented to survive. Think about that for a moment. These stories, gods and monsters, heroes and tragedies, love and war and jealousy and sacrifice, were not fairy tales meant for children at bedtime. They were the first attempts by the human mind to answer questions so enormous, so terrifying, that silence itself was unbearable. Why do we suffer? Why do we love people who destroy us? Why does power corrupt? Why does pride always seem to carry its own punishment? The ancient Greeks were not primitive. They were profoundly, achingly human. And everything they felt, every emotion they could not process, every fear they could not confront directly, they poured into these stories. Psychology suggests that when a feeling is too overwhelming to face head-on, the mind wraps it in symbol, in narrative, in myth. The Greeks were doing exactly that. They were doing what we still do today when we reach for a story that finally explains how we feel inside. So this is not just a documentary about ancient gods. This is a documentary about us. It begins before everything, before light, before time, before even the concept of beginning itself. The Greeks called it chaos, not disorder in the way we understand the word, but a vast, yawning emptiness, an infinite dark. And from that emptiness, the first forces of existence simply emerged. Gaia, the earth; Tartarus, the deep abyss; Eros, the force of love and connection; Erebus, the darkness; Nyx, the night. There is something quietly profound in that order. The Greeks understood, perhaps intuitively, that before anything could be built, there had to be a ground to stand on, a depth to fall into, and a force that draws things together. Love was not an afterthought. It was foundational. It was among the very first things to exist. Research in attachment theory today tells us something remarkably similar, that the need to connect, to be loved, to belong, is not a luxury of human experience. It is the root of it. The Greeks knew this thousands of years before the psychology textbooks were written. From Gaia came the sky, Uranus, and together they gave birth to the Titans, 12 vast, immortal beings who embodied the primal forces of the world: time, memory, justice, the ocean itself. But Uranus was afraid. Many people unconsciously repeat this pattern. Even now, the fear of being surpassed, replaced, made irrelevant by the very things they created. He pushed his children back into the earth. He refused to let them exist fully. And Gaia, like any mother who has watched something she loves be suppressed, reached a breaking point. She gave her youngest son, Kronos, a blade. And with it, he did what the oppressed so often eventually do. He overthrew his father. But here is where the story turns inward. Because Kronos, having freed himself from a father who feared him, immediately became the same thing. He began swallowing his own children whole, one by one, the moment they were born. The very trauma he had survived, he inflicted. Psychology calls this the repetition compulsion, the deeply unconscious tendency to recreate the wounds we were given, often without realizing we are doing it at all. His wife, Rhea, could not bear it. She wrapped a stone in cloth and offered it to Kronos in place of her youngest child. He swallowed the stone, never noticing the difference. And the child, Zeus, was hidden away on the island of Crete, raised in secret, growing into something his father never saw coming. When Zeus returned, he gave Kronos a potion that forced him to release what he had consumed. His siblings emerged: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and together, they waged a 10-year war against the Titans, the Titanomachy. A war not just of power, but of generation, of old patterns fighting desperately to hold on against something new trying to be born. Zeus won. And the world as the Greeks understood it began. But winning the war did not make Zeus simple or clean or uncomplicated. This is what makes Greek mythology so psychologically extraordinary. The gods were never moral perfections. They were emotional blueprints. Zeus was powerful and just, and also deeply flawed, vain, unfaithful, prone to rage, capable of both tremendous mercy and tremendous cruelty. Poseidon was magnificent and unstable, like the sea he ruled. Hera was fierce and devoted and wounded in ways that made her dangerous. Hades was solemn and misunderstood, ruling a realm no one wanted to think about. Research shows that the characters we respond to most deeply, in stories, in mythology, in cinema, are not the perfect ones. They are the ones who carry contradiction inside them. The ones who are trying. The ones who fail. The Greeks built their gods this way on purpose, because they understood that a god who never struggled would have nothing to say to a human who struggled every single day. And then there was creation itself, not just the gods but humanity. The Titan Prometheus, whose name means foresight, looked at human beings and felt something the other gods did not: compassion. He stole fire from the heavens and gave it to mankind. Not just warmth, not just light, the capacity to think, to create, to transform. Fire was civilization. Fire was consciousness itself. Zeus was furious, and the punishment he devised for Prometheus was one of the most haunting images in all of mythology. Chained to a rock, an eagle consuming his liver every day, the liver regenerating every night, the suffering beginning again each morning. Endless, cyclical, without release. Many people know that feeling, not literally, but that sense of a wound that heals just enough to be opened again. A grief that returns, a pattern that repeats. Prometheus suffered not for something shameful, but for an act of love. And somehow that makes it worse. That makes it feel more human. For the gift he gave humanity, the gods answered with Pandora. She carried a jar, mistranslated for centuries as a box, and inside it were all the sufferings of the world. Illness, jealousy, greed, despair. When she opened it, everything escaped into the world. Everything except one thing, which remained inside: hope. Think about what the Greeks were saying. They were saying that suffering is inevitable, that pain will find its way into every life, no matter what. But they were also saying that hope, this fragile, stubborn, irrational thing, is the one force that remains when everything else has been lost. Psychology suggests that hope is not a passive emotion. It is a cognitive and emotional act, a choice to believe in the possibility of something better, even without evidence. The Greeks placed it at the bottom of a jar of sorrows, because that is where you find it, underneath everything else. And then the heroes came: Perseus, Hercules, Achilles, Odysseus, Theseus. Each one a different study in what it means to be human and extraordinary, and deeply, fatally limited. Perseus, guided by the gods, faced the Gorgon Medusa, a creature so terrifying that looking directly at her turned a person to stone. He used a mirror. He faced the monster indirectly, through reflection. Psychology suggests that this is often how we must confront what frightens us most. Not always head-on. Sometimes obliquely. Sometimes through the stories of others. Through art. Through metaphor. The myth knew this before the therapy room did. Hercules to the Romans, was perhaps the most psychologically layered of all. Blessed with impossible strength. Cursed with impossible pain. His 12 labors were not assigned as celebration. They were assigned as penance, after a moment of madness in which he killed those he loved most. The strength that defined him was inseparable from the darkness that haunted him. Research shows that high-functioning people of enormous capability and achievement, often carry private burdens of extraordinary weight. The outer strength and the inner anguish are not contradictions. They are companions. Hercules was not a god who looked like a man. He was a man who looked like a god. And the Greeks never let you forget the difference. Achilles was the greatest warrior of his age, and he was undone, not by a sword, but by the refusal to be vulnerable. His mother dipped him in the river Styx, to make him invulnerable, holding him by the heel. One small point of exposure, one place where protection ran out. The brain often constructs enormous defenses around the places where we have been hurt. We build strength around our wounds, but the wound remains, and something always eventually finds it. And then Odysseus, the long way home. 10 years of war, 10 more years of wandering, storms, monsters, temptation, loss, and grief, just to reach the place he had never stopped wanting to return to. There is something in the Odyssey that reaches into the chest of anyone who has ever felt displaced. In their life, in their relationships, in themselves. The longing to belong somewhere. The exhausting, circuitous, improbable journey back to the self. But Greek mythology is not only about the heroes. It is about the ones who loved them, the ones who waited, the ones who were left behind or ignored or consumed by forces beyond their control. Orpheus descended into the underworld to retrieve the soul of Eurydice, the woman he loved. The gods were moved by his music, moved enough to allow it. She would follow him up from the dead. The only condition was that he must not look back. He looked back. He looked back. And she was gone. There are as many interpretations of this moment as there are people who have heard it. Doubt. Fear. The need to confirm what we cannot fully trust. The impossibility of walking towards something beautiful without flinching. Psychology suggests that we often destroy the very things we most desperately want, not because we do not love them, but because love itself can become the source of our deepest terror. Orpheus did not lose Eurydice because he did not love her enough. He lost her because he loved her so much that the silence of not knowing became unbearable. And then there is Narcissus, the young man who fell in love with his own reflection in the water and could not look away. We use his name today as a clinical term, but the myth is softer and stranger than that. Narcissus did not admire himself out of vanity. He fell in love with something he did not recognize as himself. He was captivated by an image, a beautiful, unreachable image that felt like the thing he had always been searching for. He could not touch it. He could only look, and he wasted away at the edge of that water, reaching for something that was never real. Many people unconsciously understand this. The idealized self, the version of who we could be, who we were supposed to become, glittering just out of reach. The ache of looking at our own reflection and feeling not recognition, but longing. There is also Icarus, who needs almost no explanation anymore because the story has become its own kind of language. His father Daedalus built him wings of feather and wax and told him, carefully, precisely, do not fly too close to the sun. Do not fly too close to the sea. Stay in the middle. Stay within limits. Icarus flew toward the sun. The wax melted. He fell. We call it hubris, overconfidence, pride. But there is something else inside that story that is harder to name. The ecstasy of ascent. The way freedom feels when you have been trapped for a long time. The way the warmth of something beautiful makes you forget, just for a moment, that it can also consume you. Icarus was not foolish. He was young and newly free and intoxicated by the feeling of rising. And the world was not designed to be gentle with that. There is the story of Persephone, taken into the underworld, and her mother Demeter, who grieved so completely that the earth itself stopped growing. Harvests failed. The world grew cold. Nothing bloomed. Because a mother had lost her daughter, the entire living world reflected that loss. Psychology tells us that grief is not a private experience. It radiates. It changes the atmosphere of every room it enters. People who are carrying it become, in some way, winter, not because they want to, but because the depth of love and the depth of loss are the same thing, viewed from different sides. Persephone returned, but only partially. Because she had eaten 6 seeds in the underworld, she had to return for 6 months each year. And so the Greeks explained the seasons, not as meteorology, but as emotion. Demeter's joy in spring. Demeter's grief in winter. The world breathing in rhythm with a mother's heart. That is the extraordinary thing about all of this. These stories did not try to remove emotion from the explanation of the world. They placed emotion at the center of it. They said the seasons change because someone grieves. They said the stars exist because gods wept, or loved, or reached for something they could not hold. They said the echo in the mountains is a girl named Echo, cursed to repeat only the last words of others because she once spoke too much, who fell in love with Narcissus and faded into sound. Two lonely people, drawn to each other, unable to reach each other, one in love with a reflection, one reduced to a voice. And between them, nothing but the hollow repetition of words that could never carry what she actually wanted to say. And at the center of all of it, woven through every myth, every labor, every descent and return and transformation, is the question the Greeks never stopped asking. What does it mean to be alive? What do we owe each other? What do we owe ourselves? How do we carry the weight of what we are, with all its glory and all its ruin? The fates sat and spun. Clotho wove the thread of each life. Lachesis measured its length. Atropos cut it. Even the gods could not avoid them. Not Zeus, not Apollo, not Hercules at his strongest. The thread would end. The question was only ever what you did with it while it was still unfolding. Greek mythology endures not because it is ancient, but because it is accurate. Not in its literal details, but in its emotional architecture. In its unflinching willingness to say that the powerful are also broken, that love can destroy, that grief reshapes the world, that the journey home is long and strange, and requires more of you than you knew you had to give, that even gods feel jealousy and longing, and the particular ache of being misunderstood. These stories have survived thousands of years because every generation looks into them and finds their own face looking back, not a monster, not a hero, just a human being, doing their impossible best, in a world that has always been beautiful and always been dangerous and has never once come with instructions. You are Perseus, using reflection to face what you cannot look at directly. You are Odysseus, finding the long way back to yourself. You are Demeter, grieving so completely that the whole world knows. You are Persephone, living in two worlds, belonging fully to neither. You are Icarus, not a warning, but a person who once, for a moment, felt what it was like to rise. The Greeks did not create mythology to explain the gods. They created it to explain themselves. And somewhere across all those centuries, through all that fire and stone and sea, they reached forward into time and wrote something that still finds you, exactly where you are, and quietly says, you are not the only one who has ever felt this way. You never were. If this story moved something inside you, if you found yourself somewhere in these myths, then you are in the right place. Subscribe to this channel for more psychological explorations of the stories, symbols, and silent truths that make us human. New documentaries every week. We will keep searching the deep places together.